So, sparking God demand in the divine economy. What are we talking about here? What's the divine economy? Well, let's start. Even if you don't know anything about economics, supply and demand is certainly something you've heard of. Pretty simple concept, right? If I want something and you can supply it to me, then we can come to an arrangement. And as these arrangements grow larger and more complex in the world, we can study them and learn a fair amount about how the world is currently being organized. So that's how supply and demand is typically talked about. The spiritual world is a world of infinite supply. So if that's the case, what happens to this equation or this relationship? We could ask, is there a supply problem in the world today? Well, we're certainly being told there is in many different ways, and some of you probably seen that in your own experience. But again, we're talking about the divine economy here. So we put it a different way. We could say, in the world's current spiritual unfolding, is there a supply problem? Right? When you make calls for the light, or for the Christ to descend into your own life, is the answer from the masters ever, sorry, we're fresh out. It's a shame you didn't come yesterday. It's going to be a few weeks. Right? That's not how it works. Now, you always get exactly what you're asking for right away? No. And there are also laws in play here. Your ability to receive from this infinite supply is limited by your ability or your willingness to correctly deploy it. What comes in must go out and be shared. But is that a problem of supply? No. The supply is there. No, it's a question of our demand for it. See, you have to want it enough to go on an adventure in search of it. You have to want it more than anything else. And you have to be willing to give up shabby human beliefs and a lot of things that aren't doing you any good, but you may not want to give it up, but you have to allow these things to be replaced with the being and the body and the mind of God. When you do that, then you can experience that infinite supply. So, my friends, the problem is one of demand. Now, if you are here listening to me talk today, well, there's a pretty good chance that all of us here are pretty demanding. Master, help me with this, help me with that, right? So often that sometimes, as Saint Germain says a little bit later in this dictation that we are working from today, that sometimes they have to remind us to stand on our own 2 feet. But how many in the world are driving around in a broken down, rusted up spiritual vehicle, not even realizing that they can ask for an upgrade, that upgrade is available, and that the place to start is by asking for it. So given that, maybe asking too much is a good problem to have. Obviously, everything in balance. So, the thing we're talking about today is creating greater God demand in the world. Right? How do we share that God demand? How do we get people fired up about something that they don't even know that they're missing? I believe the answer to that is they have to see it. You have to show them something they didn't know was missing and spark that God demand. Right? They may not know what it is, but when people feel it, they know they want more of it. So what is it? Few answers I'm going to give you. Okay? It's an alchemical process in which worldly lead is continuously replaced with spiritual gold, little by little. When you're in this process, there's a good feeling that comes from attunement, the infinite source. Constantly bringing it in, letting go of that which is in its way. And in this process, there's a fire that burns within you and transforms not just your experience of life, but others' experience of you. You spark God demand in them. And if they take up the adventure, well, they're going to show you things that create more God demand in you, because we could all use more. And so this whole process is a feedback loop where every new attainment feeds the next one in an upward ascending spiral. And more pent-up demand is released into the world. So we're going to get a little deeper into those ideas. But in this dictation from Saint Germain, it's quoted in the letter in this week's service matrix, in this dictation, right in the very first sentence, gives us an answer. And that first word and that answer is Elan. Now, Elan is one of these words that I've certainly heard and, known from context, but it's certainly not one that I used with I don't know, probably ever. And so, I knew it had something to do with, maybe doing a good job or doing it smoothly or having some style. And he's going to give us a definition that if you're anything like me, it might break your brain at first. So we're going to prepare the soil, as it were, with a couple of dictionary definitions. All right. First one is vigorous spirit, energy, style, and enthusiasm. And definitely my favorite, impetuous ardor. Now, in this case, I think impetuous is being used in the sense of having impetus or force. And then ardor means having fervor, passion, zeal. All right. So this first word, Elan. So now that we have a basis for it, we're gonna read Saint Germain's words. Elan, the science of an individual's buoyancy and divine bon vivant, the understanding of the good feeling that is manifest within the soul that is finely attuned to divine grace and able to distinguish the source of her being raised up. This is to be conveyed to the aspirant upon the path. And it needs to be conveyed at the time that he is able to overcome those fearful momentums of the past that have generated pain and sorrow within the orbit and world of the individual. It is our desire to teach you how to rise and how not to remain bound by the cords of inertia and inactivity. It is our desire to teach you how to understand the meaning of divine grace. When I moved among the crowned heads of Europe and in the courts of Europe, I entered a room carrying with me an aura of Elan. That men were made to feel the buoyancy of their own souls was to them a cosmic miracle. For many of them surfaced, and like a cork bobbing upon the waves, they were able to feel the joy of the sparkling and gaily dancing sun. Yet a few moments before, they were indeed in a subterranean world. They were in a world of emotional substance, each one trying to impress the other with the grandeur of their face and form, or to display the garments which they wore, because they did not understand how they could draw forth from on high the great electric spark of God, which is far superior to all fashionable designs. Well, when I first discovered this dictation, was led to it, that third paragraph where he talks about moving among the crowned heads of Europe, and everybody sort of waking up and feeling this buoyancy, it's kind of where my brain came online. And then I, went further in and got excited and started taking notes and had all these things I wanted to talk about. And then maybe the third or fourth time I was going through it, I read the first sentence again. And it was like this experience. There's a very popular broadcaster who sometimes when he has a guest on, and they will be, they'll be in this place where they know what they're going to talk about. And they're so excited to get into the details. They drop some blockbuster in the first 2 or 3 seconds. And this poor guest he interrupts them right away. He goes, stop, 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 stop. Wait, stop. You're burying the lead. So I felt like this happened to me. I couldn't believe that it was as if I hadn't even read it once. So I had to go very slowly. And that's what we're going to do now with this first sentence. Elan, the science of an individual's buoyancy and divine bon vivant, the understanding of the good feeling that is manifest within the soul that is finally attuned to divine grace and able to distinguish the source of her being raised up. This is to be conveyed to the aspirant upon the path. And so to break this down, what I kind of had to do was go from the inside out. So the good feeling that is manifest within the soul that is highly attuned to divine grace. Okay, now that maybe we can get our hands on, right? Because we know that good feeling. We might not have known to call it that. The soul longs for divine union. Doesn't always know how to get there. But the soul always let you know when there's that moment of attunement going on. Right? And the soul always tell you. It's as if that good feeling is your soul going, this. Okay, so that's the good feeling that is manifest within the soul that is highly attuned to divine grace and able to distinguish the source of her being raised up. See, and I believe without distinguishing the source, this experience, this good feeling is fleeting. It comes and goes. Okay, what are we talking about distinguishing the source? Well, I think that can be very simple. I think that can simply be knowing that it is from that infinite source. Okay, the mind plays a role here. We don't just have that good feeling, but the mind must be attentive to the experience, because the inattentive mind will just let the experience come and go and go, oh, that was great. But the attentive mind will acknowledge the attunement with something greater than the self. And one of the things that does is it gives us the opportunity to give gratitude, which just by giving attention to that thing, it's almost an instinct in us. Say thank you. And by distinguishing the source of being raised up in that moment, the soul learns the lesson. And this is the thing that allows this alchemical process to really get rolling, okay? Staying in this, a fire burns, and this feedback loop that I'm talking about activates. Because, see, it creates conditions for even greater attunement. When we discover that feeling and we put our attention on source, well, that refines and increases our attunement. And of course, that experience of attuning to divine grace and feeling its benevolence increases that good feeling in the soul, which increases the attention to the source, and so on, and so on. And we all know what it's like in life, even in a very small way, right? To be having some of that attunement. We see things going smoothly. We're able to see just a little bit around the corner. Things don't have to be jagged or distressing. And so we are also creating good experiences in the world, which is increasing this positive momentum, this good feeling. You know, and this is probably a good moment to mention when we're talking about putting attention to source. It's very easy to forget that when we're told to not be prideful and to give all the glory to God, this isn't just some rule of a jealous deity. It's practical advice. Not doing it makes everything not work. Doing it gives us an opportunity to get on this upward ascending spiral. So it's a little bit of the first sentence, right? Because it's not just that good feeling, it's the understanding of the good feeling that is able to manifest within the soul that is highly attuned to divine grace and able to distinguish the source of her being raised up. You know what that is? That's mastery, okay? That's, you know how to drive this thing. That's the elan, right? You don't just have this feeling, and you don't just know the source of it, but you move with the confidence of someone who understands the process, who's entered into it in an ongoing way and is sustaining and maintaining that experience. So the source of the soul's being raised up is the very fact of being in that process, transmuting the self and ever increasing God demand through that process. Because the more we get with our attention placed properly, the more we want. That's still not the whole sentence. It begins with Elan, the science of an individual's buoyancy and divine bon vivant. Buoyancy. Now, there's a great word, right? Because that's the tendency to float up. We certainly want that. And just like the physical world, he's telling us that buoyancy is a science, right? If we're not floating up, there's a reason, there's a set of conditions that are necessary to float up. And in fact, the science of an individual's buoyancy, we're supposed to be buoyant, right? And if we're not, there's a reason. Sometimes we're asking for more light in our lives, and it's like we're standing at the bottom of a pool with our pockets full of lead, asking God, please send me a breath of air, right? And then we're thinking, does he want me to die down here? Am I so unworthy? And of course, we're just asking the wrong question. Because if we know that part of this process is one of buoyancy, floating up, just like Saint Germain said that the people he met in the courts of Europe would surface just by being in his presence. Well, then we can ask the question, what is weighing me down? That's a powerful alchemy, transforming the wrong question into the right one, right? Because that wrong one is never going to do you any good. It's worldly substance. And then asking the right question, you're told to take the lead out of your pants. So, Elan, the science of an individual's buoyancy and divine bon vivant. Now, bon vivant, this is funny. The word divine was added by the editor when this dictation was transcribed, because what he actually said was Elan, the science of an individual's buoyancy and bon vivant. Now, bon vivant, the common usage of it, is someone who lives the good life in terms of wine, women, and song, in terms of good food, right? In terms of material things. And you see, I think what he's doing here is he's using the real meaning of bon vivant, right? Who's living the real good life? Is it the man who's living it from 9 to midnight and then has indigestion and a hangover? Or is it the man who has irresistible buoyancy and sparkles with divine delight? Right? So he's showing us here actually a little bit of alchemy, how easy it is to just take that worldly definition and just replace it with the heavenly one, right? And as soon as that's done, you see it. You see that leaden worldly definition of the hedonist that's been replaced with this gold of the adept moving through the world with style and grace. Elan, the science of an individual's buoyancy and bon vivant, the understanding of the good feeling that is manifest within the soul that is finely attuned to divine grace and able to distinguish the source of her being raised up. This is to be conveyed to the aspirant upon the path. And it needs to be conveyed at the time that he can overcome those fearful momentums of the past that have generated pain and sorrow in the orbit of the individual. So now that we're starting to get a sense of what this Elan, this vigorous spirit is, it makes sense that if there was a time when we can overcome fearful momentums of the past, overcome pain and sorrow, well, yeah, that Elan, that blast of energy, that'd be a good thing, a good feeling, and knowing the source of it and understanding it, even just knowing that it's possible for us to do that. Right? But of course, sometimes we don't even know we're in a fearful momentum. I mean, pain and sorrow certainly can get your attention. And if you can switch your attention properly, you have a much better chance of moving through it with grace and getting the lesson from it which is in and of itself an alchemy. Okay, but the next sentence also tells us a way that we know when we're in a fearful momentum. He says, it is our desire to teach you how to rise and how to not remain bound by the cords of inertia and inactivity. So inertia and inactivity tell us that we're in this negative momentum, right? And the trap of that inertia and inactivity is that we start bouncing back and forth. I should do this. I shouldn't do this. I'm right. I'm wrong. He's right. He's wrong. Blah, 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 blah. Right? It's just this repetitive process that doesn't go anywhere because typically not asking the right question. What's a better question to ask in a moment of inertia and inactivity? How is this a fearful momentum? Instead of being asked to be sent a breath of fresh air from the bottom of the pool. And when he's talking about inertia and inactivity here, I think we're also seeing elan being defined via the negative. In other words, this is what it looks like to lack that buoyancy, that divine sparkle. It looks like inertia and inactivity. So it's amazing how much can be accomplished just by asking the right question. Saint Germain then carries on. It is our desire to teach you how to understand the meaning of divine grace. And there it is again, this high spiritual concept of divine grace. He says, wants to teach you how to understand the meaning of divine grace, something most of us would be loath to say, I understand the meaning of divine grace. But I believe what we're being asked to do here is to understand that breaking out of inertia and pain and into that upward ascending spiral is an alchemical process that can be learned. That's why he's talking about learning how to understand the meaning of divine grace. If this is an adventure, not some dry set of steps that we do down here in the human, right? But it's a way of interacting with the divine source and replacing our human substance with that divine substance little by little. And it's an active process where we affirm the source and we ask to be taught. And we make an effort to create the conditions for growth. It's also a passive one where we allow the divine light to saturate us and to replace everything earthly. So elan, state of buoyancy. It's not a passing mood. It's a sustainable state of being and an unfolding process. Okay? And those around Saint Germain in those courts of Europe experienced that buoyancy by being around him. So isn't that interesting? All right, so now that we've talked about elan, talk a little bit about the manifestation, deeper into this process. Go back to the dictation, just read for a little bit. I desire to bring you the mighty favor of the court of Almighty God, which will win for you that raiment that is of divine origin. I desire this for you so that you may learn how to cultivate the sparkle in the eye that is God-inspired, that you may learn how to manifest the beauty of countenance that is occasioned by familiarity with the face of God. This favor of the court of Almighty God will also win for you that divine raiment so that you may understand how you may reinforce the technique divinely employed by mystics down through the centuries, whereby they were able to maintain a change in their appearance from time to time, from age to youth. And they were able to show forth the power of light as the power of transformation. This raised not only their thoughts and feelings to a state of buoyancy and joy, but it also raised their physical form so that the very atoms within the substance of that form did cavort and behave as though the very spirit of youth were indeed alive and in manifestation in themselves. You do not know, precious ones, the activity of God that is manifest in a tiny baby, that infant sparkling with divine desire for perfection, does attract your smile. And you are able to rejoice in the face of this infant who has come yet a little while past from the very courts of heaven. Precious ones, understand the law of God that does not take understand that the law of God does not take exception to a man or woman because he or she is advanced in age or has matured, but understand that God is perfectly willing to bestow this self-same spark, which is manifest in a baby, upon an individual whose thatched roof has become somewhat gray in tone. So, very important thing that Saint Germain is telling us here is that this process, the endpoint, is transformation of physical appearance. Okay, so these are these spiritual bodies that I'm talking about that I read, to you about from Corinthians. It says, the sparkle in the eye that is God inspired, that you may learn how to manifest the beauty of countenance. So manifesting that physical appearance, the predicate to that is the sparkle in the eye that is God inspired. You have to have that to learn how to do the next step. He also says what starts as buoyant thoughts and feelings becomes atoms cavorting, right? So it's this inside out process. Later on in the dictation, a passage we're not going to read, he talks about how in the courts of Europe, he looked 40 when he was over 100. And, imagine these baffled, well-dressed aristocrats, and he said he was suspected of being his own grandchild or look-alike. Remarkable. So the end point is physical transformation, but then where it ends is very clear that God does not take exception to a man or woman because there's some advanced years. Showing age is not bad. In fact, later on, he even says that spiritual maturity is a prerequisite to this attainment. However, that spark, right, that's in that infant that makes everybody smile, God is perfectly willing to bestow that upon you. So you have that ability to go out into the world and be seen as that baby and to generate that smile and to help people to feel their own buoyancy. Okay, and this is what's going to generate that God demand that we started off talking about. Okay, another passage here takes us a little bit deeper into the process. He says, I wish to call to your attention then that the life and joy of God is sparkling and dancing in the atmosphere at all the time. And it requires merely an attunement of your own blessed selves with the joy of God to bring it into manifestation. First, there is needed the still pool of the mind. And as though one were to cast a pebble into the mind, one places a thought of gaiety and of youth and of divine delight into the pond of being. So start out with that still water, still mind. And then this pebble of divine ideation causes the water to move. And then that one stands back at the very edge of the pond, throwing back the head with a joyous laugh and watching the ripples of this idea of gaiety, now implanted in the self, begin to manifest and stir the entire pond. So is the emotional body affected. And when one affects the emotions, soon the mind must be in hot pursuit, as a lady will drop her handkerchief and then cause a man to pursue her in order to bring it to her. So the mind will come and bow to the emotions when stirred by God ideals. And thus there will be a reunion of mind and feeling. And in that sublime moment, one can apply to the great etheric body of his being and ask that there be released therefrom a stream of radiant energy from the Godhead, which is reminiscent of the moment when the soul first came to self-awakening and self-awareness and spoke and said, "Lo, I am," with the joy that that occasion brought. So that is very beautiful language. And I think encoded in it is a bit of a formula. There's more about the alchemy, because the steps that are described there is the still mind, the ripple, the emotions becoming engaged, the mind following, the descent of radiant energy. And another step that I'm going to add, which is repeat. Because this isn't something you do once. This is an ongoing process. I believe that these are sort of the steps of like an engine functioning. This is something that we can practice and we can break down and do slowly. But I think this is something that can accelerate and become a state of being. So, breaking it down, still mind. The best way to create the conditions for still mind that I know of is practicing meditation. Now, I don't think it's important to become an expert meditator or to put hours and hours and hours into it. I mean, I certainly don't think there's anything bad about it. In fact, in my life, I've found that 5 minutes is a meaningful amount. It's maybe not the ideal amount for me, but it's a meaningful amount. And the reason I say that it's a meaningful amount is because in that 5-minute period, I can get a minimum of one complete breath in and out, following the whole thing with my consciousness. And I find that one complete breath it's like a template. It's a snapshot of that still mind, of that smooth, glassy water that he wants us to visualize. And anytime you can remember to place your attention there, you can bring it back, right? So again, this isn't saying that to have this process that Saint Germain is talking about, that it starts with meditation specifically, but we have to work to create the conditions where it can occur. And this just happens to be a good way to get better at having a still mind, right? And so, that meditation practice, that still mind, is something we're going to define as a passive quality. That's the pole that it lives on. It's mostly about not doing other things. Then the pebble ripples. Now, he's talking about creating a deliberate ideation, gaiety of youth and divine delight. And in fact, a little bit later on, we're going to join together. We're going to practice that. I believe as this process goes on, you don't always realize you're creating the ripple. Or rather, you can do things in your life to create the conditions for it. It's one of the reasons that we like to have, beautiful things or some masters in our midst and in our environment. But I mean, we also have it come from nature, and we have it come from music, and we have it even come from things that aren't necessarily spiritual, but where we have that moment where something, where we have a stillness, and then it is rippled by an experience of beauty or gaiety, joy. Right? Now, if it's coming to us from where we know not, from something that's just coming into our consciousness, the next step, which is very important either way, but is even more important, okay? Because I believe to the alchemist, it doesn't matter so much what it is that moves that sense of divine sparkle into motion, but what we do with it is very important, right? And so in this next step, the emotions are engaged. Now, very often we experience this as a feeling of love, but I think what also could be being described here is that good feeling, that soul quality of good feeling that we were talking about, where the soul sees a little bit of attunement or potential for divine union, right? But that feeling of love, and sometimes it is a feeling of, excitement or it can be seriousness. It can be a lot of things when the emotions get involved. But when the mind comes in and follows the emotions, right? This recalls that very first lesson. It becomes, where are we placing our attention, right? What is the source of this emotional stirring? We go back to the divine light. We go back to God. We go back to the master. The mind directs our attention properly so we don't just spin off on some flight of fancy. And then that state of being where the emotions have been activated, but the mind steps in and acts as that stabilizing, directing force. Well, that is a moment of union that recalls the ultimate goal here, which is that union of the spirit of the Holy Christ self to the soul. And in that moment of reunion, this potential to draw down the radiant energy comes. And I think very often when we have one of those moments where we come to that we're really just being our real selves in that moment. We are naturally anchored in the light. So of course, greater light comes in to our physicality and into our lower bodies. It's almost automatic. But I'm so glad to have read this and learned from Saint Germain, because what it's reminding me is, that next step in placing my attention is to actually call it down, because this window is opened up. So why not ask for it? And then this whole process repeats, right? One of the great dangers of the spiritual process, I don't know if danger is the right word, pitfalls perhaps, is that as we when we have good experiences on the path, we go, I gotta keep it. This is great. I need to not lose it. And of course, that's exactly how you lose it. Because what needs to be done is you need to return to that stillness and return to that next rippling and that next union of the mind and emotions. Again, that's that elan, that's that thing, the ongoing process that'll give us that sparkle that creates the God demand in the world. Then Saint Germain continues, this will then be brought again to mind. He's talking about that initial creation of the soul, the low I am, self-awareness. This will then be brought again to mind and rekindled so that the soul can laugh at age and at all the passages of time. And the ravages which seem to take their toll on men need not of necessity affect you. For you can maintain, if not in the appearance world, then in the thought and feeling world, that spirit of elastic joy, which is Ascended Master God inspired, right? That's what we need, is we need elastic joy that can bend and shift and change with all of the circumstances of the world, not be brittle, dependent on circumstances. Again, he reminds us that the result is physical or not. If it's not in the appearance world, then in the thought and feeling world. And that's where the base of this whole process is. So it describes a process that affects not just you, but the world. He says, you must realize, blessed ones, that there lies within the domain of yourself great cosmic laws that can change your feelings and your thinking about yourself until you are able to manifest the God victory which overcomes the world. This in itself is a prime and potent example to mankind, who, when they gaze upon you and see this manifestation, will also recognize that perhaps there is some slight deficiency in themselves, and they may desire, after all, to pursue the fountain of youth with greater alacrity. Right? Now, others perceive some deficiency in themselves. That's certainly not something we like to think about when we talk about going into the world to show it, right? But what's he talking about there? He's talking about sparking that God demand. We want that youthfulness and that energy. So this is about us showing it and creating God demand. Now, after that spark is lit, you don't know where it goes, right? It's your process and my process and their process. We just know that it's better to be lit up by that spark, better to have that demand than not. He continues, alas, O vanity, thy name is vanity. Thus mankind seek to manifest the appearance of youth and the feelings of youth, yet they do it for the sake of human vanity, whereas we do it for the sake of the human family, that we may manifest the pure image within which God himself adores, that we may manifest the pure image which God himself adores, and thus we fulfill the edicts of divine manhood. Right now, if you're anything like me, when you think about having some divine sparkle, I mean, you work on it internally, but then you also think about putting on a nice shirt. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, because certainly going to be hard to have that good feeling if you don't look good, you don't smell good, want to do your best in the world. I think Saint Germain has made that very clear in other places. But he gives us a great question here. As you go into the world and do these things, is this for human vanity or the human family? I started asking myself this question this week. And, I think part of being human is that the answer is little both, I guess. But just by asking it, right? And just by knowing that we want to give our gift for the sake of the human family, little by little, we're letting go of that lead weight and we're replacing it with something beautiful. So what we manifest is very important. And that's why it's worth going into this process, even if you stumble and you have to figure out, well, wait a minute, where is my goodwill and my benevolence towards mankind, and where is my vanity? Because what you manifest is very important. Saint Germain says, understand the recompense of the law, precious ones. Each child of the light who manifests the divine principles of freedom will bring to the great God designer the beneficent approbation of a world that cannot deny the evidence of their senses. I think what he's saying here is if you come into the world with that elan, you're going to awaken in people beneficent approbation, right? This means goodwill and approval towards the Creator. And how good for the soul is it to feel beneficent approbation, to feel this sense that this is a good place and there's sparkle and joy in the world, right? So this is good for the soul, creates that good feeling, and it's good for the divine economy. It's good for for creativity and for creating value in the world. He continues, but when individuals insist upon living in such a manner as to bring discord and inharmony into their thought and feeling worlds, they will inevitably manifest this in some manner or other before their fellow men. And thus they do, in effect, actually bring discredit upon the God who created them to be perpetual flames of divine youth and are manifested at all times. Bring discredit upon the God who created them. That's pretty rough, right? So it's important to cultivate this buoyancy, okay? Because the opposite, going out in that state of inertia and inactivity and discord and inharmony, right, which grows out of everything that is not elan and buoyancy, it affects the world. It doesn't just affect you. And of course, we live in a world where the forces of darkness are up to a lot of things, but one of the things, it seems to me, is a lot of provoking petty discord, because apparently that's all it takes to bring discredit upon God, to create a world where people go, this is a terrible place. How could God let this happen? And we want to do our part. So we seek the buoyancy. We know we're not going to do it perfectly, but we understand that it's important, that it's a responsibility to do so. Because we're always responsible. And of course, that's the thing that we don't 100% get when we're still in the human, that the masters know. This total responsibility for all the energy, right, that they have access to. He says, I want you to understand, precious ones, that all that the ascended masters do is with purpose, and none of it is without purpose. Even when we seem to be engaged in some aspect of levity, it is because we desire in our heart to spark some God demand within your own world that will bring you the blessings of God eternally. And it will produce some change in your world that will cause joy to manifest, not for a moment like a burning candle, but as a permanent force field in your world that will never go out because it is sparked by divine ideation. So joy manifests as a permanent force field, and it is sparked by divine ideation. And I believe this is because, or this is through this ongoing alchemical process, this engine of growth, right, that is set into motion by God demand, by wanting that union more than you want other things. And having that be this joyful, buoyant experience with that good feeling of the soul at its center, not some dry misery. And so as we discover supply, we ignite more demand. The more that it's done, the more multiplicative, the more exponential the growth is, right? Remember, it's very easy to forget that this process of moving up the upward ascending spiral, this process of alchemy, it is not a linear process where tomorrow is going to be like yesterday. Because as we move up, right, the output of every experience, every time the soul and the mind join, the emotions and the spirit come together in the state of real you and correctly attribute the source. Every time we ratify and we correctly anchor that good feeling, well, the next round of it is at a higher level and a higher level and a higher level. And it is a process that's more like doubling or multiplying than it is like adding. It's just that, and there are word problems, there are things in mathematics that explain this, where when the goal is very far away, even if you're doubling your progress, every day, it looks like very small progress for a very long time. But then at the end, suddenly there are these enormous steps, doubling. So we must not get discouraged when we start off talking about spiritual bodies, right? And I haven't said it out loud yet, but we're talking about having access to those spiritual bodies without having to go through the transition called death. So you're going through that process via alchemy. And as I've mentioned a couple times, one of the things we're looking at today is this moving back and forth between these polarities of positive and negative, active and passive, distinguishing the stuckness of inertia and inactivity, which is just this sort of right, wrong, yes, no, through this constructive, positive, negative pole. And in that constructive process, everything in the world, everything worldly is raw material for alchemy, right? None of it is inherently, or rather, the question of whether or not it is inherently bad is the wrong question. The question is, what am I going to do with it? Doesn't mean you want or need to go down every road, right? But the question is, what in this requires transmutation? And then to do that transmutation. Saint Germain says, now, if you will grasp with me this precious thought for a moment, you will recognize that all of you actually hold within yourself the capacity to think. And if you hold the capacity to think, then why not do so? And if you hold the capacity to think, why not do so in a cogent way that is divinely cogent, and recognize that such a thought is a spark to lift you up? Right now, in the presence of the masters in this great spiritual material, we can be afraid sometimes to have our own thoughts. But as Saint Germain explains to us, it's a responsibility to think divinely cogent thoughts. Well, do we know how to do that? Well, we know them when we see them. We know them when our soul goes this. When you create the conditions, that still mind, surrounding yourself with the divine, the next step, right? The next step, part of the process, whether it's reading the dictations, whatever it is to have your own thoughts. It's not optional. This is part of the alchemy, taking it in and then filling the space with something from you, co-creation. And here's why this is so important. He says, therefore, if you think that God has wrought deliverance and freedom for you, freedom from fear, freedom from doubt, and all that mankind have imposed upon themselves of bondage, you will say of this unreality is nothing. You will say this unreality is nothing. It is human creation. It lacks the warmth of my divine presence. It lacks the warmth of the ascended masters. It has no identification with permanent reality, and therefore, why should I not discard it? So it's these sparks, it's these thoughts that we have when we let the divine light something in us. And then we have that idea in a way that is a spark for us. It's our unique understanding of it for that moment. And if you follow that thought, he's saying, with a spirit of surrender, the unreal falls away. And he gives us a great question. He says, it lacks the warmth of my divine presence. Next time, ask yourself that same question. Does this have the warmth of my divine presence? Not everything does. Thus, you will cast aside the outworn garments of self, and you will replace them by the mighty transcendent garments of light, simply by saying to yourself, I am a being of divine delight. My consciousness is fair. You will recall that in a dictation of some time past, I myself did speak and said, quoting an old fairy tale, mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all? And I said, with all of the vanity I could muster, why, I am. Now, of course, his I am is the capital I, capital A, capital M. But you see, by using vanity here, he does the same thing that he did with Bon Vivant earlier, this alchemical process of replacing this broken down idea of human ego and puffery with the celebration of one's divine presence and calling it vanity. And there you go. The old meaning, just showing you how easy is it to throw away when you are presented with a better option. And this active step, you see where he says, I am a being of divine delight. My consciousness is fair. This follows right on the heels of saying, well, this human quality is not necessary. I will let it go, right? It's never enough just to let it go. We have to fill that vacuum. This is where the process of that alchemy continues. There's never a single step where we stay put. We're filling it in. We're asserting a divine reality in the place of that other thing. He says, consider then that you are able to change your form. How would you change that nose? How would you change those eyes? How would you change that look? How would you make that form glow? Right? When it's put as changing your physical body, boy, it really brings that sort of question home. You then must decide, because you are the prime mover in your own world. If you do not move in your own world, you will become subject to all of the arrows of mortal hostility that are ever arrayed against the good and the beautiful by those who desire to say, I don't think she really looks very nice, or her eyebrows are too high, or perhaps her hairline is too low, or they think that some other quality is just a little bit of the type that ought to be criticized. Right? So the world is full of negative momentums to fill every vacuum. So we're going to use that divinely cogent thought to assert God reality, to think and speak and feel into being something beautiful, right? And it's better to do your best and make a mistake that has to be corrected rather than to let the world do it for you. Continues, if you will let the arrows and slings of outrageous fortune, the arrows of mortal hostility come against you as they do against every beautiful woman, then I assure you, ladies and gentlemen, you will find that you will be outpicturing those arrows of mortal hostility yourself. And then you will need to resort to all types of maneuvers in order to produce beauty and form. Okay, so now in a moment, when we do meditation together, we're going to give a tube of light with this idea, okay? We're not going to let the arrows and slings of outrageous fortune or the arrows of mortal hostility come against us. And we're not going to do it by defending against it, right? We're going to do it in the way that he's talking about. We're going to do it as an assertion of something beautiful, an assertion that we are God-created beings, enshrouded in divine light, saturated with divine light. And it's this active principle, it's this assertion, filling the world with this beauty that protects us. It's not defense. Now, for the rest of the stick, he goes on with much on this active principle, right? And I think, this is very, very understandable, because one of the things we love as human beings, we love being told we can just receive that divine light and we can just bask in it and that it's all coming to us and the masters are going to help us. But then he's really telling us, okay, but we have to, this isn't about something we're just doing today. This is a continuing process, right? So as much as he says he wants us to understand, he wants us to learn by doing. And I think some of that, one of the best ways to do it is just by asking the right questions, right? Am I engaged in an upward ascending spiral? Okay, yes. How do I go further? How do I go deeper? Ask how. Or am I in a state of inertia? How is this a fearful momentum, right? But as much as we have to be willing to try by asking, we really have to show it. We have to be willing to try something. Because just as I want to light this divine spark in you, I don't know what you're going to try, but I know that it has to be something. Ladies and gentlemen, you must start somewhere. After all, you may not always look to us as though you were firemen going to a fire, but I assure you that you have a need to do so. You have a need to actually sound the sirens. You have a need to actually sound the alarms. You see, most individuals give no thought whatsoever to life except to plan ahead according to mortal standards. But there is very little actual planning done by individuals according to divine standards. Very few individuals actually plan from day to day how they will be able to draw out the pattern of the cosmic man and mold themselves according to that pattern. No, blessed ones, they are so busy defending the mistakes of a misguided ego that they have no time whatsoever to be able to spiritually plan a blueprint for their own life, which they themselves could design according to God intent. You see, you are a co-creator with God. And when he gave you free will, he also, with that free will, gave you a solemn responsibility of freedom so that you would, of necessity, play a part in the shaping of your own destiny. So, let us allow the masters to create in us that spark of God demand that lights a permanent flame, lighting our way on a sacred adventure. And in so doing, let us allow that sparkle of buoyant energy that we discover not once, but again and again and again shine through us, that others may see it and themselves be lifted up. And let us discover not once, but each time anew, the great source of our light, always going further up until that light gives us the authority to transform our earthly forms into perfected spiritual vehicles that give honor to their original God design. So, we're going to do ritual meditation in which we're going to give decree 01, the violet fire, the tube of light. And we're going to do a brief guided meditation and then give the decree 7000, I am the one. So I want you to start off by sitting comfortably. After we give this first decree, we're going to go right into the meditation, and we're going to give this decree, and I am the one, in a gentler manner, more meditative manner than you might sometimes give it. The idea being, we're going to feel that divine sparkle. We're going to feel that gently dancing energy. And that's where our focus is going to be. That our words need not be loud or forceful. That as this energy sparkles and moves, gives us a great momentum that we will simply allow him to be. Violet fire and tube of light decree by the ascended master, Saint Germain. O my constant loving, I am presence, thou light of God above me, whose radiance forms a circle of fire before me to light my way. I am faithfully calling to thee to place a great pillar of light from my own mighty I am God presence all around me right now, today. Keep it intact through every passing moment, manifesting as a shimmering shower of God's beautiful light through which nothing human can ever pass. Into this beautiful electric circle of divinely charged energy, direct a swift upsurge of the violet fire of freedom's forgiving, transmuting flame. Cause the ever-expanding energy of this flame projected downward into the force field of my human energies to completely change every negative condition into the positive polarity of my own great God self. Let the magic of its mercy so purify my world with light that all whom I contact shall always be blessed with the fragrance of violets from God's own heart, in memory of the blessed dawning day when all discord, cause, effect, record, and memory is forever changed into the victory of light and the peace of the ascended Jesus Christ. I am now constantly accepting the full power and manifestation of this fiat of light and calling it into instantaneous action by my own God-given free will and the power to accelerate without limit this sacred release of assistance from God's own heart until all men are ascended and God-free in the light that never, never, never fails. Now let us close our eyes and sit with our spines straight. Gently focusing the attention on the passing of air in and out of the nostrils and across the upper lip. Just repeat this process and draw your attention back to it if you find that it has wandered away. Every time we focus on a complete in and out breath without losing attention, we imprint a moment of peace in the consciousness. This peace can be recalled anytime, simply by focusing your attention on the breath. The next breath brings to mind the image of perfectly still water, reflecting the glorious daylight like a pane of glass. Now you're standing on the shore with Saint Germain, looking at that pure, still water. In his hand, he shows you a pebble. At first, it seems small and ordinary, but as you gaze at it, you see that it is gently dancing with divine energy, glowing with white light and sparkling with all the colors of the rainbow. The energy it emits has a spirit of youthfulness and gaiety. He casts the pebble into the water, and you watch beautiful, symmetrical ripples moving outward. And as they approach you, you feel them subtly moving through your own energy field. The ripples are a soothing, uplifting energy. It's a good feeling. And as those ripples move across your head, they gently cause a smile to appear on your face. And then you find yourself laughing at Saint Germain. You're not even sure why. The pebble is concentrated joy, and the ripples that it creates are an irresistible force. Then Saint Germain turns to you and asks, will you come into this world of our reality? Will you put our great purple fiery cape upon your shoulders? Will you become noblemen, able to create and dominate every situation into which you enter? And you answer, yes. And now Saint Germain, with solemnity and deep love, asks you, will you take your vow of marriage in the alchemy of your soul's union to the living spirit? And at this question, your heart swells with love, for it is all your soul has ever wanted. And your mind comes forth, understanding that this is the solemn responsibility for which it was created. And you answer, yes. And peace fills your soul, and your body, and your mind. As you spend a moment tearing with Saint Germain, enjoying that beautiful day and the beautiful water. Just now returning to stillness. And with your next breath, you will slowly begin to return to the room. Gently experience yourself in this moment of space and time. And prepare yourself to gently open your eyes. Keeping in you that good momentum, the good feeling in the soul. Preparing to give Decree 7000, I am the one. in the same spirit of gently dancing energy. And then when we're done with this decree, our beloved Judith will lead us in the ritual of Holy Communion. I Am the One by Saint Germain. Together. I am the one. I am accountable. I am Saint Germain in embodiment. See here, my hands, my heart. These belong to Saint Germain. Come into my temple, O hierarch of the Aquarian age. Come into my temple and take dominion over the earth. For I see, O God, nothing that I can do to stop the onward march of world totalitarian movements. I cannot stop the infiltration of this government and this economy. What can I do? I am one and alone, yet I know this is my key. For God in me is the law of the one. God in me encompasses every other one who is within his being and in whom he dwells. I am the law of the one. Therefore, the one spirit of the great white brotherhood enters my being through the blessed heart of Saint Germain and the members of the Darjeeling Council of the great white brotherhood. And therefore, because I am the one, because my temple is the temple of the living God and of the prophet Samuel, I can do something. I can embody the spirit of freedom that will turn the worlds in the face of all counter movements, in the case of all other infamy and darkness. I know that through me and me alone, because I am alone in the one, and the one is all one with all who are of that one. Through that I, through that me, and me alone, God can change the world. God can turn things around and bring in the new day with a minimum of destruction and loss of life. I can be with Igor. I can hold the balance. I can be with Mary, and I can be in the flame of the Fatima prophecy. And I can fulfill the word of God, and the word through me will survive, and the message will survive, and the Christ will survive, and the earth will endure, and the golden age will come. Through the law of the one in me, as I am a striver day by day, the relentless enemy of Christ must say, die. It cannot continue, for I am where I am. Feet firmly planted in the earth, I take my vow of marriage in the alchemy of my soul's union to the living spirit. I am the invincible bride of Christ. I am the bride of Christ in Saint Germain, in El Moria, in Jesus, in Cthulhu, in Archangel Michael, in Archangel Gabriel, in the heart of Jophiel. I am the bride of Christ, of that Christ. I am the bride of the entire spirit of the great white brotherhood. Where I walk, so is the garment of God of that brotherhood. I wear a uniform representing the I am race. I am the guard of that race and my nation. I am the manifestation of God upon earth, and I will bear my office holy and white in nobility and in honor. I will salute old glory, and I will sing the song of the free, and I will know that the work of my heart and hand and my head, endued with the mind of Christ, will make the difference, because I am the one. Amen.